Let me say something that will make a lot of people uncomfortable because it directly contradicts what you've been taught your entire life. Attraction does not disappear with age. It exposes what was already there. And most men never realize this until it's too late. If you believe younger women are drawn to looks, money, or surface confidence, stay with me, because that belief is exactly why so many men become invisible over time instead of magnetic. What I'm about to share isn't flattering, and it isn't motivational in the way you're used to. It's clarifying. And once you hear it, you won't be able to unsee it in yourself or anyone else. There's a reason some men become calmer, more respected, and more attractive as they age, while others grow louder, more defensive, and increasingly ignored. The difference has nothing to do with genetics or luck. It has everything to do with how they relate to themselves, to uncertainty, and to power. Most people never question why certain men can walk into a room and shift the energy without saying much. Why conversations slow down around them. Why they're listened to differently. Why they're remembered. That effect isn't accidental, and it's not taught anywhere. This video isn't about pleasing anyone. It's about understanding the psychological signals you're constantly sending without realizing it. Signals that either invite curiosity or quietly repel it. If you've ever felt that you're doing everything right, but still being overlooked, this will explain why. If you've ever wondered why confidence sometimes works and sometimes backfires, this will answer that. And if you're willing to hear the truth without defending yourself, stay until the end. Because the men who understand this don't chase attraction, they become unavoidable. When we talk about attraction, most people rush straight to surface-level explanations. Age gaps, looks, lifestyle, money. But those explanations are lazy. They avoid the uncomfortable truth, which is that attraction is first registered at a nervous system level, not a visual one. Before someone evaluates your appearance, your status, or your story, their body has already decided how safe, grounded, or unsettled it feels in your presence. And this is where calm becomes everything. The first thing younger women notice in attractive older men is not charm, it's not confidence in the loud, performative sense. It's stillness, a quality that is increasingly rare in a world addicted to speed, urgency, and constant self-presentation. Stillness isn't passive, it's contained. It signals that this person is not ruled by impulse, anxiety, or the need to prove something. And psychologically, that reads as strength. Think about how most people move through life. They rush their words, they rush their emotions, they rush to explain themselves, justify themselves, defend themselves. That rushing is not energy, it's leakage. It's the nervous system signaling uncertainty. When someone speaks quickly, reacts instantly, or fills every silence, they are unconsciously asking to be regulated by the other person. They want reassurance, they want validation, they want the interaction to stabilize them. An attractive older man does the opposite. He regulates himself. He pauses before speaking. He doesn't interrupt silence because silence doesn't threaten him. He doesn't overcorrect when misunderstood. He doesn't scramble to manage impressions. That calm tells the other person, I am not overwhelmed by this moment. And that message lands before a single word is processed intellectually. Younger women live in a world saturated with overstimulation, notifications, social comparison, emotional volatility, constant performance. Most men they encounter mirror that chaos. They react quickly. They pursue aggressively. They mistake intensity for depth. So when someone enters the room who is composed, unhurried, and internally anchored, it stands out immediately. Not as excitement, but as relief. Calm creates contrast, and contrast creates attraction. This calm is not indifference. That's an important distinction. Indifference is numb. Calm is present. A calm man is paying attention, but he's not gripping the outcome. He's engaged without being entangled. He listens fully, but he doesn't disappear into the other person's emotional field. He maintains himself while being connected. That balance is deeply regulating to be around. From a psychological perspective, this taps directly into attachment dynamics. Humans are drawn to people whose nervous systems feel stable, especially those who grew up around emotional unpredictability, which is more common than most people admit. Calm signals consistency. It signals safety without suffocation. It says, "You don't have to manage me." And here's where age quietly becomes an advantage. Not because of years, but because of exposure. A man who has lived long enough to experience disappointment, loss, failure, rejection, and uncertainty, and didn't collapse under it, carries those experiences in his posture, his pacing, his tone. He no longer panics at discomfort. He knows emotions rise and fall. He doesn't catastrophize moments. That embodied understanding can't be faked. Younger men often mistake confidence for assertiveness. Louder voice, strong opinions, immediate reactions, but real confidence is slower. It allows things to unfold. It doesn't need to dominate space to secure it. And younger women, whether consciously or not, are exquisitely sensitive to this difference. They notice how you handle pauses. They notice how you respond when plans change. They notice whether your mood shifts based on their approval. Stillness reveals whether your sense of self is internally generated or externally dependent. Another important layer here is predictability. Calm men are emotionally predictable, even if their lives are complex. You know where you stand with them. There's no emotional whiplash, no sudden withdrawal, no overinvestment followed by resentment. That steadiness allows attraction to grow rather than spike and crash. This is why calm is often mistaken for mystery. It's not that the man is withholding. It's that he isn't overexposing. He doesn't flood the interaction with his inner world to fast-track intimacy. He understands that depth emerges with time, not pressure. That patience creates space for curiosity, and curiosity is far more sustainable than excitement. Philosophically, this kind of calm reflects acceptance of impermanence. A man who understands that nothing needs to be controlled to be meaningful doesn't cling. He participates fully while allowing outcomes to exist beyond his grip. That orientation toward life shows up everywhere, in relationships, conversations, disagreements. He doesn't need to win every exchange. He doesn't experience disagreement as a threat to his identity. Younger women notice this especially during moments of tension. When there's a difference of opinion, when emotions rise, when boundaries are tested, a calm man doesn't escalate. He doesn't withdraw dramatically. He stays present without becoming reactive. And in those moments, attraction deepens, not because of romance, but because of respect. There's also something profoundly attractive about a man who is not in a hurry to define the connection. He allows things to evolve naturally. That lack of urgency communicates abundance, not scarcity. It says, "I'm not building my worth around whether this works out." That stance is magnetic because it removes pressure from the interaction. Importantly, this calm is not achieved by detachment from life. It's achieved by engagement with life. Men who develop this quality have usually confronted their own fears, examined their patterns, and learned where their emotional edges are. They've done the internal work required to no longer be hijacked by every feeling. That self-knowledge stabilizes them. And here's the uncomfortable truth: calm is not something you perform. It's something you earn. You can't imitate it convincingly if your internal world is chaotic. Eventually, the body reveals the truth. Tone cracks, eyes dart, words rush. Stillness only holds when it's real. That's why this point connects seamlessly to everything else. Emotional control, lack of neediness, purpose. They all stem from the same source, an internally regulated self. Calm is the foundation. Without it, everything else becomes compensation. So if you're listening to this and thinking, how do I become calmer? The answer isn't techniques or tricks. It's tolerance. The ability to tolerate uncertainty, to tolerate silence, to tolerate not being chosen immediately, to tolerate discomfort without rushing to escape it. Every time you stay with discomfort instead of reacting, you strengthen this muscle. Calm is built when you stop trying to manage how you are perceived and start managing how you respond. And when you do that consistently, something subtle but powerful happens. People begin to orient toward you. Conversations slow down around you. Emotional intensity stabilizes in your presence. Attraction emerges not because you demanded it, but because your nervous system invited it. The final thought to leave you with is this: calm is not the absence of desire. It's the absence of fear running the desire. And the man who learns that difference doesn't chase attraction, he becomes the place where it naturally lands. When people hear the phrase emotional strength, they often imagine emotional expression, vulnerability on display, big feelings articulated eloquently. But attraction doesn't emerge from emotional exposure alone. In fact, unfiltered emotion without regulation often does the opposite. What younger women notice in attractive older men is not how much they feel, but how well they hold what they feel. That distinction is subtle, but it's everything. Emotional gravity is the ability to stay centered when emotions are present, yours or someone else's. It's the capacity to experience intensity without becoming it. Most people are pulled around by their emotions like weather. A good interaction makes them euphoric. A small rejection destabilizes them. A disagreement feels like an attack. That emotional volatility is exhausting to be around, even when it's wrapped in charm. An attractive older man doesn't outsource his emotional stability to the room. He doesn't need the conversation to go well in order to feel okay. He doesn't need agreement to feel respected. He doesn't need constant reassurance to stay engaged. That internal anchoring creates a kind of psychological weight. When he speaks, it lands. When he listens, it feels deliberate. When he pauses, it feels intentional rather than awkward. Younger women notice this almost immediately, especially in moments where emotions could easily spiral. When something awkward is said, when boundaries are tested, when vulnerability appears, many men rush in those moments, either to fix, to impress, or to protect their ego. They interrupt, they over-explain, they invalidate without realizing it. All of that communicates anxiety. Emotional gravity does the opposite. It slows the interaction down. It says, "This moment doesn't overwhelm me." That steadiness allows the other person to relax into their own emotions without fear of being managed or judged. It creates space rather than pressure. And psychologically, space is what allows attraction to deepen. This is why emotional control is often misunderstood as emotional distance, but distance disconnects. Control contains. A man with emotional gravity is not cold. He's warm without being consuming. He can sit with someone's discomfort without rushing them out of it. He can hear criticism without collapsing or retaliating. He can disagree without trying to dominate the conversation. That ability is rare because it requires a strong sense of self. If your identity is fragile, every emotional moment feels like a threat. You defend, you justify, you counterattack. But when your identity is stable, emotions become information, not verdicts. You listen differently, you respond rather than react. Younger women, particularly those who are emotionally perceptive, are highly attuned to this. They notice whether a man becomes defensive when challenged. They notice whether he gets sarcastic when uncomfortable. They notice whether he withdraws when things get real. These reactions reveal how safe it is to exist emotionally around him. Emotional gravity creates safety without control. And safety, contrary to popular belief, is not boring. It's grounding. It allows desire to breathe. It allows intimacy to unfold organically rather than being forced through intensity. When someone feels emotionally held rather than emotionally managed, trust begins to form. There's also something deeply attractive about a man who doesn't need to win emotional exchanges. He doesn't argue to dominate. He doesn't perform empathy to be praised. He doesn't weaponize vulnerability. He understands that not every moment needs resolution. Some moments need presence. That wisdom comes from having lived long enough to know that emotions pass, but reactions leave residue. From a philosophical standpoint, emotional gravity reflects acceptance of human complexity. A man who has it doesn't need people to be consistent all the time. He understands contradiction. He understands ambivalence. He understands that emotions don't always make sense, and that they don't have to. That acceptance removes pressure from the interaction. Younger women feel this as freedom, freedom to express without being analyzed, freedom to change their mind without punishment, freedom to be imperfect without fear of emotional withdrawal. That freedom doesn't diminish attraction, it intensifies it. Because attraction thrives where authenticity is allowed. Another layer of emotional gravity is restraint. Not repression, but discernment, knowing what to share, when to share it, and why. Many men overshare early as a shortcut to intimacy. They mistake disclosure for connection. But connection is built through shared emotional experience over time, not through information dumping. A man with emotional gravity understands pacing. He lets trust earn access. This restraint signals maturity. It says, I value this connection enough not to rush it. That patience stands in stark contrast to emotional impulsivity, which often feels self-serving rather than relational. Younger women pick up on this difference intuitively. Emotional gravity also shows up in how a man handles desire. He doesn't push it prematurely. He doesn't act entitled to it. He allows attraction to be mutual rather than extracted. That restraint transforms desire from pressure into possibility, and possibility is far more compelling than urgency. Importantly, emotional gravity isn't about suppressing emotion. Suppression creates rigidity. Gravity creates depth. A man with emotional depth has access to his feelings, but he's not ruled by them. He doesn't panic when sadness arises. He doesn't lash out when anger appears. He doesn't collapse into self-pity when disappointed. He processes internally before expressing externally. This quality often comes from having faced one's own emotional patterns honestly. Recognizing where you react instead of respond, where you seek control instead of connection, where you confuse intensity with intimacy. That self-awareness softens reactivity and strengthens presence. Younger women notice this especially over time, in how conflicts are repaired, in whether apologies are sincere or strategic, in whether accountability is taken without deflection. These moments reveal emotional maturity far more than charm ever could. And here's the key point. Emotional gravity makes others feel more themselves, not less. They don't have to shrink to protect your ego. They don't have to perform to maintain harmony. They don't have to carry your emotional weight. That lightness is deeply attractive. In a world where emotional chaos is normalized and emotional manipulation is common, a man who can hold emotion without being hijacked by it becomes an anchor. People gravitate toward anchors not because they are exciting, but because they allow others to be steady too. The closing truth to reflect on is this: emotional gravity is not about controlling others. It's about being so grounded that emotions orbit you without pulling you apart. And the man who develops that gravity doesn't need to demand connection. People feel it, and they stay. One of the most counterintuitive truths about attraction is this: the moment you stop trying to be liked, you become interesting. Not abrasive, not dismissive, interesting. Because neediness is not about wanting connection. It's about needing validation to stabilize your sense of self. And younger women are remarkably sensitive to the difference. Most men don't realize how loudly neediness speaks. It shows up in over-texting, in excessive explaining, in subtle self-deprecation disguised as humor, in checking reactions too often, in adjusting opinions mid-sentence to maintain approval. None of this is malicious, it's human, but it creates a dynamic where attraction struggles to breathe. An attractive older man doesn't operate from that place. He enjoys connection, but he's not psychologically dependent on it. He can engage fully without clinging. He can express interest without urgency. He can walk away without bitterness. That lack of internal pressure is felt immediately, even if it's never named. Younger women live in an environment where attention is abundant, but authenticity is rare. Many men are constantly performing, curating versions of themselves they believe will be chosen. Compliments are strategic. Agreement is tactical. Interest is exaggerated to secure a response. Over time, this creates fatigue, not because attention is unwanted, but because it's often transactional. So when someone shows up without an agenda to be liked, it disrupts the pattern. The nervous system notices. Curiosity replaces predictability. The question shifts from, what does he want from me? To, who is he really? This is the psychological power of non-neediness. It creates space for the other person to lean in rather than feel pursued. And leaning in is always more potent than being chased. Non-neediness doesn't mean emotional unavailability. That's an important clarification. Emotional unavailability is avoidance. It withholds connection to maintain control. Non-neediness, on the other hand, allows connection without attachment to outcome. You can be present, expressive, and interested without needing the interaction to validate you. That distinction is subtle, but it's the difference between tension and ease. A man who lacks neediness doesn't monitor the room for approval. He doesn't fish for reassurance. He doesn't inflate himself to impress or shrink himself to be accepted. He lets himself be seen as he is, trusting that resonance will either happen or it won't, and that both outcomes are survivable. That trust signals abundance. Not necessarily abundance of options, but abundance of self. A belief that one connection does not define your worth, and that belief is deeply attractive because it removes emotional pressure from the interaction. Younger women notice this especially in how a man handles disinterest. Does he become sarcastic, withdraw dramatically, try harder, or does he accept it with dignity and remain unchanged? That response reveals everything about where his self-worth lies. When rejection doesn't destabilize you, it communicates that your value isn't up for negotiation. That steadiness creates respect, and respect is often the gateway to attraction. There's also a philosophical layer here. Non-neediness reflects an internal locus of control. Your emotional state is governed by your values, not by external reactions. You're not outsourcing your self-esteem to someone else's attention. That autonomy is rare, and rarity amplifies desire. Curiosity thrives where outcomes aren't forced. When someone isn't trying to extract a result, the mind has room to explore. Younger women feel this as psychological freedom. They're not being pushed toward a role. They're not being idealized prematurely. They're not being recruited into someone else's emotional narrative. Instead, they're being met. Another place neediness reveals itself is in over-accessibility. Always available, always responding immediately, always accommodating. While this can seem generous, it often signals a lack of boundaries. And without boundaries, attraction erodes. Desire needs edges. It needs space to move. An attractive older man values his time, not in a performative way, but in a grounded one. He doesn't rearrange his life to secure attention. He integrates connection into a life that already has structure and meaning. That integration signals wholeness. Younger women notice whether a man's life expands when she enters it or collapses around her. Expansion feels inviting, collapse feels burdensome. Non-neediness also shows up in conversation. A man who isn't seeking approval doesn't dominate discussions to prove intelligence. He doesn't mirror opinions to maintain harmony. He can disagree calmly. He can say, "I don't know," without embarrassment. That intellectual honesty creates depth. When someone isn't trying to be impressive, their presence becomes more compelling. Because you're not interacting with a persona, you're engaging with a person. From a psychological perspective, neediness often stems from unresolved self-doubt, a belief that love must be earned through performance. That belief drives people to overgive, over-explain, and overstay. But attraction doesn't grow through compensation, it grows through coherence. A man who has done the internal work to know who he is doesn't need to audition for connection. He shows up aligned. And alignment is magnetic. Younger women sense this alignment not through words, but through consistency. Does he behave the same when he's admired as when he's challenged? Does his interest feel steady rather than reactive? Does his presence feel chosen rather than demanded? These questions are answered unconsciously, moment by moment. There's also something quietly powerful about a man who allows mystery, not manufactured mystery, but natural incompleteness. He doesn't reveal everything at once. He doesn't rush intimacy. He lets layers unfold with time. That pacing invites curiosity rather than satiating it prematurely. Neediness tries to secure closeness quickly. Neediness trusts that closeness deepens naturally. And here's the paradox: when you stop chasing being chosen, you often become more choosable, because people are drawn to those who don't need them to be okay. This doesn't mean indifference. It means self-sufficiency. A man who enjoys connection but doesn't collapse without it. Who desires companionship but doesn't fear solitude. That relationship with himself becomes the template for how others experience him. Younger women, consciously or not, are drawn to that self-trust. It signals emotional adulthood. It suggests a relationship dynamic where autonomy is respected, not threatened. The practical implication here is simple, but not easy. You develop non-neediness by building a life that feels meaningful, independent of external validation. Purpose, structure, values, self-respect. These things anchor you internally, so connection becomes an addition, not a requirement. When you no longer ask, "Do you like me?" and instead ask, "Do our values align?" the entire dynamic shifts. The final reflection to sit with is this: attraction doesn't respond to pursuit. It responds to presence without demand. And the moment you stop needing to be chosen, you give others the freedom to choose you, not out of pressure, but out of genuine desire. There is a widespread misconception that attraction is anchored in achievement, titles, wealth, status, a resume of wins that proves value. But when you look closely at what younger women actually respond to in attractive older men, it isn't the trophies. It's the trajectory. Not where he is standing, but where he is headed. Direction matters more than position, because direction signals life force. A man with direction carries a quiet certainty, not arrogance, not grandiosity, certainty. He knows what he's building toward, even if the structure isn't finished yet. And that clarity does something profound psychologically. It organizes his behavior. His time makes sense. His choices feel intentional. There's coherence between what he says and what he does. That coherence is deeply reassuring to be around. Younger women notice this very quickly. They notice whether a man's life feels like it's moving or stalling, whether his energy is oriented forward or looping backward, whether conversations are filled with plans and principles or with nostalgia and resentment. Direction is revealed not through declarations, but through patterns. A man without direction often compensates with explanation. He talks about what he used to be, what could have been, who wronged him, who didn't recognize his potential. There's a subtle bitterness that leaks through even the most polished narratives. And while sympathy might arise, attraction rarely does, because stagnation, no matter how justified, feels heavy. An attractive older man doesn't live in the past, even if he honors it. He references his experiences without being defined by them. He doesn't romanticize his peak or resent his detours. He understands that identity is not a static achievement but a moving process. That orientation toward growth makes him feel alive. Psychologically, direction signals hope. Not naive optimism, but grounded expectancy. It says, "My life is not finished." And that message matters. People are drawn to those who are still in relationship with possibility. Even uncertainty can be attractive if it's paired with intention. Importantly, direction is not the same as ambition. Ambition chases outcomes. Direction follows values. A man can be highly ambitious and deeply lost. He can achieve relentlessly without knowing why. Younger women often sense this emptiness beneath the drive. It feels hollow, performative, exhausting. Direction, on the other hand, is quieter. It's less about proving and more about aligning. A man with direction knows what he will and won't compromise. He understands the cost of saying yes to everything. He has boundaries around his energy. That discernment creates stability. Younger women feel safer around men whose lives have shape. Not rigidity, but shape. There's a rhythm to how they live. Work, rest, connection, solitude. Nothing feels chaotic or compulsive. That rhythm signals emotional maturity. Direction also influences how a man relates to relationships themselves. He's not looking for someone to complete him or rescue him from boredom. He's looking for compatibility, alignment, someone who can walk alongside him rather than carry him. That shift changes everything. When a man has direction, he doesn't rush intimacy to fill a void. He allows connection to develop at a pace that respects both people. He doesn't need the relationship to give him purpose, because purpose already exists. That makes the relationship lighter, more spacious, more honest. Younger women notice this in subtle ways. Does he talk about his future as something he's actively shaping or as something he's waiting for? Does he make decisions with intention, or does he drift and rationalize afterward? Does his life feel self-authored or reactive? Direction is also revealed in how a man handles obstacles. Setbacks don't derail him entirely. They recalibrate him. He adjusts course without losing momentum. That resilience is not loud, but it's unmistakable. It communicates competence, not just in the world, but within himself. From a philosophical perspective, direction reflects meaning. A man who has meaning doesn't need constant stimulation to feel alive. He doesn't chase novelty to escape emptiness. He understands why he wakes up in the morning. That understanding steadies him. Younger women are often surrounded by men who are busy but unfulfilled, productive but restless, socially active but internally vague. So when they encounter someone whose life feels intentional, it stands out. Not because it's perfect, but because it's oriented. Direction doesn't require certainty, it requires commitment. Commitment to values, to growth, to becoming rather than arriving. A man can say, I don't have all the answers, but I know the questions I'm living toward. That honesty is far more attractive than false confidence. There's also something deeply grounding about a man who respects time. He doesn't waste it. He doesn't kill it. He invests it. That respect shows up in how he schedules his days, how he shows up to commitments, how he listens. Presence becomes a byproduct of purpose. Younger women notice whether a man's attention feels scattered or directed, whether he's always half elsewhere, chasing the next distraction, or fully engaged in the moment. Direction anchors attention, and attention is one of the most powerful forms of attraction. This point ties back to everything else. Calm emerges when you're not lost. Emotional gravity develops when your inner world has structure. Non-neediness grows when your life has meaning beyond approval. Direction is the spine that holds it all together. Without direction, confidence becomes brittle. With direction, humility becomes strength. A man with direction doesn't need to advertise it. It's evident in how he lives. And here's the part many men resist hearing. Direction is a choice, not a discovery. You don't wait to find it. You build it through daily alignment, through saying no to what dilutes you, through tolerating uncertainty while staying faithful to your values, through acting before motivation arrives. Younger women aren't looking for a finished product. They're looking for forward motion. For someone whose life feels like it's going somewhere real, even if the path isn't linear. The final reflection to leave you with is this: attraction doesn't follow success. It follows momentum rooted in meaning. And when you choose direction over drift, you don't just become more attractive to others. You become trustworthy to yourself.